Live from Gerber, this is the Locktoon Podcast. I'm Amy.
And I'm Mel.
We're rereading Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and today we'll be covering Gideon the Ninth, chapters 36 through the Epilogue.
Whoop whoop!
You know, not much happens in these couple of chapters. There's a big fight. Gideon dies. Harrow becomes a Lyctor. It's pretty chill.
Yeah, it's pretty chill, but it's so emotional.
It is.
I sobbed the whole way through both of these chapters, rereading it for like the millionth time. I feel like rereading it, I get more and more emotional because you just know what's happening and you feel it on a visceral level. But first, Amy.
Yes, Mel.
What kind of pasta do they eat on the ninth house?
What kind of pasta?
Elbows.
Oh my god. Wow, I want everyone to know that when we got on this afternoon, Mel did not have a bone joke and came up with that in like 3 seconds. So freaking cool.
I just have a thing. I have a secret talent for telling bone jokes. I don't know.
I'm glad that we've discovered it here. We do have a couple of announcements. First, we're sorry that we've had so many gaps between episodes. I got so sick. Mel has been traveling the whole country, but we're here. We're still recording.
We're here.
It's Pride Month.
We're queer. Woo,
Happy
woo,
Pride.
Happy Pride.
Mel, I should post that picture of us on Pride when we were like 25.
Yeah, we'll post our baby Pride photos on the website.
We are gay in that picture. Yeah, it's coming your way. I'll tweet it. Also, we do want to reply to everyone's messages that they've sent us. We've just been kind of a crazy time. So we will get to those. If you left your email, we will get to those as soon as we can.
I think we said this towards the end of our last episode, but just a reminder, we're finishing out Gideon today, but there's a few gems in the back of the book that we're going to talk about. The cohort intelligence files, the sermon on cavaliers and necromancers, and that will completely wrap up the book. We'll do a little, maybe shorter episode on Dr. Sex, and then we will start season 2.
Oh my God.
Where we dive into Harrow, and we'll probably take this one a little bit slower because it's a really hard read.
It's juicier.
It's juicier. There's a lot there.
Ooh, there's so much. There's more puns. There's more, it's more everything. It's
more everything.
good.
It's just all this shit that you love about Gideon the Ninth gets magnified in Harrow. And it gets gayer.
A whole lot gayer.
Arguably, I think it's gayer.
It's okay. I will say that we might still have a couple of breaks between episodes. We'll try and get them out every Tuesday, but you know, Mel runs a business. I'm a gardener and the tomatoes are needy.
It's summer.
All right, let's get into it. So we start with chapter 36, just a little so we can recall where we're at. Palamedes blew himself up to try and mess up Cytherea. Cytherea comes out of the closet as a Lyctor. Happy Pride. And comes at Gideon and is like, I'm here to exact revenge on whatever, and you're first, Gideon. And that's where we ended chapter 35. So we're at chapter 36. It starts with Camilla coming out of nowhere and attacking Cytherea.
Blam! I love it. It's like Camilla hit the advancing Lyctor like the wrath of the Emperor. It goes from 0 to 5,000 so fast. There's like immediate energy. And this fight is, how many pages is this chapter? This might be the longest chapter in the book.
Yeah, because this is only 2 chapters, right, that we're covering?
We're only covering 2 chapters, but the majority of the writing is in chapter 36. It's almost 30 pages of a fight.
Wow.
And this fight it's a good fight.
fight.
I was saying to Amy before we hopped on that this fight should win an award of some sort. This chapter specifically, it's so well written. And we break this fight down into like roughly 4 phases. You get the first 3 phases in this chapter, and then the final 4th phase in the next chapter, and then there's like a couple interludes here and there. But we start this fight with phase 1, and phase 1 is Camilla versus Cytherea, And while that's happening, we've got Harrow and Gideon versus the construct.
Yeah. So at the very beginning, Camilla seems to be holding her own versus Cytherea. I mean, she's not actually, but she is a badass. And there's a line that says something about such was Camilla's perfect hate. And I think this is a reference to Psalm 139:22, which is a Bible verse that says, I hate them with perfect hatred. I'm just saying.
How did you even know that?
Because when I read perfect hate, it pinged.
Huh.
I mean, you study enough Bible verses, I'm telling you. This is also where we get that line. When Harrow appears, she tosses Gideon her longsword, which is a great moment. And we get this very good line that is quoted a lot, which is Harrow says, show them what the ninth house does. And Gideon says, we do bones, motherfucker.
And a fun little fact, when we were first starting our podcast, we thought that we could kick off or close the podcast with "We do bones, motherfucker," and Amy and I could not figure out how to say it at the same time without cracking up.
We couldn't do
so
it. We
nixed it. But it's one of my favorite lines in the book. It's so badass. Also, when I'm reading this fight, the imagery and the metaphor is so good that I read it and visualize the most epic kind of drama movie scene where you're watching like something in IMAX and the sound effects are so loud that your body vibrates. That is what I feel when I'm reading this, and it's really amazing that the writing like this can actually do that to someone.
Yeah.
And I love just the drama of Harrow standing in a pool of osseous dust and facing the construct with a hot-eyed, half-delighted anticipation.
Oh, yes.
In front of her necromancer, sword held ready. Like, just, this is the moment we've been waiting for Harrow and Gideon to just team up and kick ass. And
they're an excellent team.
Obviously. After the "we do bones, motherfucker," it goes into this whole montage of how well they're working together. And to build that up, Tamsin Muir writes, long years of warfare meant they knew exactly where the other would stand. Every arc of a sword, every jostling scapula, no hole in the other's defenses went unshielded. They had never fought together before, but they had always fought, and they could work in and around each other without a second's thought.
Ugh.
You can just imagine how beautiful it is to just watch these two work together.
I know. In the same way that you had these really distinct images in your head of this fight, this is the bit. I have this thought a lot, as any fan person would. I want this to be a movie or a TV show, obviously, but this fight makes me want it to, I want it to be an animated TV show. And this fight would be so sick. Animated.
Yeah.
Like I can see it in my head.
Yeah.
I am not an animator.
Someone please make this.
It is, yeah, it's the dream. It's so vivid and so well described, but never too much. It's like, it's crisp and quick, but very descriptive.
Very descriptive. And, you know, while Harrow and Gideon are fighting this construct, Gideon can see out of the corner of her eye Camilla still fighting Cytherea.
Trying to approach Cytherea, right?
Yeah, trying to. But seeing Camilla just kind of going nuts. And at this point, Camilla doesn't know Palamedes is dead yet.
Well, I think she must, because doesn't Gideon say she's glad she would never have to tell? Oh, maybe she must.
I think she might have an idea, but it's not confirmed for like a few more pages when Camilla actually explicitly asks Gideon what the deal is.
Yeah.
But there's also this great observation that Gideon's making. So Harrow is doing this really sexy thing where she's like punching the monster's midsection with these beads or whatever.
Oh my God, yeah, it gets kind of sexual, actually.
It's a very sexual fight. And I will point out some of the phrases where I giggled and felt like a 10-year-old boy. But there's a wonderful description of Cytherea from Gideon's perspective where she says she was utterly beautiful and entirely terrible, whole, unhurt, untouched by anything that had happened to her. The wounds from Palamity's last spell seems to have vanished, as if they'd never been made. It was like she wasn't even made of flesh. A memory flashed up through the haze of adrenaline. Do I look like I'm in the queendom of my power?
Oof.
It's such a good callback. It's such a good, oh, we've come full circle and now we can put the pieces together moment.
Oh, it's magical. It gets pretty dire pretty quickly. Harrow does manage to use regenerating ash to hold the construct down, but Camilla gets stabbed through the shoulder by one of the construct's arms. By the way, this is the construct that killed Isaac. I don't know if we even said that.
Yes.
The construct comes back.
Right. We're like, oh, it was Kithareya that killed Isaac. It all kind of comes together.
Yeah. And they are saved, ironically, just in the nick of time by Ianthe.
Right, but hold on. That's when fight phase 2 happens, and there's a couple more like really cute things that happen in phase 1 of this fight. The first is not so much cute, but just kind of a weird, creepy thing. And again, a call back to Kithareya knowing who Gideon is and where Gideon comes from, but Gideon not knowing. And I love how this fight is written because it's kind of this totally unrealistic thing that you see in dramas like superhero movies where they're talking as they're fighting and they're like, I will, whatever. And it's like, no, you could just hop into the fight. But Kithareya is kind of toying with all of them. And she's facing Gideon and says, you were wonderful. You could have made that little nun such a cavalier. I almost wish you could have been mine. And Gideon's like, you can't fucking afford me. Oof. Which is great because, 10 minutes ago, Gideon was still in love with Dulcinea, and now the tables have totally turned.
I think you'll find that she's in love with Harrow, but go on.
Gideon can love many people at one time.
I guess that's
We've
true.
already talked about this. Mm-hmm. Here's the sexy thing that happens. Okay. So they realize that in order to defeat this construct, they need to actually put into practice the...
Oh my gosh, yes, I need to be inside you.
I need to be inside you, Harrow says.
Mel, when I read that line, I'm like, you didn't have to write it
no,
like that,
was on purpose. I need to be inside you. Breach the legs. I will show you exactly where. I mean, okay.
Come on.
That is the gayest thing I've ever read.
Oh, it's so silly. And every time I read that line, I'm like, I just feel like Harrow would be too coy. Like, even in the middle of a fight scene, she wouldn't be able to say, I need to be inside you.
Yeah, it was a fun, I love that little bone that Tamsin Muir threw out there for us. We've just been waiting for a makeout session to happen. We don't get it, but we do get, I need to be inside you. And that's fine. We'll take it. But the cool thing that's happening in this fight, and again, just speaks to the imagination and creativity that went into this writing, is this description of when Gideon is thrusting her sword into this construct, Harrow is then throwing like a skeleton into where that thrust is happening, and it's melting. And the cute thing that goes on is that Gideon realizes that Harrow has figured out how to actually create perpetual bone. And she's so prideful. And it's really cute. She's just like so proud that she actually gets distracted by thinking about how great Harrow is. And she crushes her knee because she's not paying attention. And this is like a key turning point in the fight because Gideon is incapacitated. Harrow has used up so much of her power. And Harrow's like, did you behold me? I have bested my grandfather and my grandmother and my father. And then she passes out.
She smugly passes out.
And that's when we move in to phase 2, which I have labeled old news versus fresh meat.
This is the bit where Camilla almost gets stabbed through the heart. Well, she does get stabbed through the shoulder, and then Cytherea is about to kill her and is stabbed through the back by Ianthe, who is a Lyctor, as we know. And we move into a pretty epic fight between Ianthe and Cytherea.
Epic. It's like the volume gets turned up like a million decibels. There's more flesh magic happening, which I'm not wild about, but it's not as gross as what we saw with the 8th house.
Right, because it's blood and it's not like fat and lymph.
Yeah, it's not fat. And yeah.
I never want to, why did I even say, I'm never going to say lymph again.
Yeah. But Ianthe kind of joins the fray. She stabs Cytherea in the back.
Right.
And she's like, spoke too soon, old news. And that's how Ianthe enters the fight, which is just the most Ianthe way to enter a fight.
I'm actually surprised that Ianthe does enter the fight.
Me too.
I feel like Ianthe's vibe is very calculating. It's what is in it for me. I guess she must figure that, I don't know. But I mean, she's like protecting these people who, I mean, she just spent a long time gloating at and, you know, saying that they underestimated her. And now she's saving them, really. I don't know. Or maybe she's just trying to flex a little.
It's odd that in this moment it comes off as her saving Camilla, because I get why Ianthe's playing some sort of long game that includes Harrow. And she mentions that in the next book. And I also would understand her from a cocky kind of place, wanting to take on Cytherea just to take her on, to demonstrate her own power. But also she did just become a Lyctor, and Cytherea is trying to kill all of them. And I imagine that, you know, if Cytherea succeeds in killing the rest of them, she's probably going to attempt to kill Ianthe too, or at least injure her quite a bit, which is what happens.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of the motivation, it is an epic fight, but it is interesting because it seems like Ianthe has really got the upper hand, but we learn very quickly that Cytherea has just been holding back, basically. And Ianthe, I think, says, "Are you tired?" And Cytherea says, "Not particularly, but you're exhausted."
You're exhausted. Yeah. And kind of while they are fighting, we get a little interlude where Gideon is pulling Harrow and Camilla to safety. And Camilla asks Gideon what happened to Palamedes, and Gideon's like, Gideon's like, he's dead. And she says, did he say anything? And Gideon's like, he said he loves you. And Camilla's like, fuck off, no he didn't. And Gideon's like, right, he said you would know what to do. And there's just a ton of relief that washes over Camilla, because she's like, yeah, I know what to do. And in this point in time, we have no idea what's going on here. But later we find out.
Yes. And in this fight between the two Lyctors, the wall that separates the atrium from the terrace is knocked down, basically. And Gideon manages to take her unconscious necromancer and support Camilla out onto the terrace. So the three of them are out on the terrace. Cytherea and Ianthe start fighting out on the terrace, and the construct is still being held inside the atrium by Harrow's magic. So that's where we're at.
Yep.
And once the tides turn, Cytherea basically goes up to Ianthe, kind of knocks all of her spells out of the way, grabs her throat, and then just straight up cuts off her arm and starts to siphon her for her life force.
Yeah, I think she says something like, I mean, and this is cruel, because she doesn't have to cut off Ianthe's arm. But she says, you know, you're going to live because you're a Lyctor, but you don't need your limbs.
Right.
That is wild. I'm damning you to a life of eternity without limbs.
Yeah. We've said it once. We'll say it again. Cytherea is a little unhinged. She's being mean.
They are both bananas.
They're bananas.
It's interesting. You and I had a conversation, I think, maybe in our last episode or 2 episodes ago, about what really kills Cytherea. And you can see here, as we're leading up to the moment where Cytherea cuts off Ianthe's arm, there is kind of a description here around how she's actually not healing.
Right.
And she seems to be surprised by that. I think there's a line in here where she's like, keeps touching the blood around her stomach. And Gideon is like, I wish you wouldn't be so interested.
Right.
And more afraid. But Cytherea is just kind of like, oh, wow, weird. I'm actually bleeding. And that's not usual. And that is a result of this turbo cancer that Palamedes gave her.
Right. And Camilla says that she just kind of skinned over the damage. But when she starts to siphon Ianthe, she does actually start to heal because she's using Ianthe's life force. And there is a really funny line where she's siphoning Ianthe and she's kind of like looking down at her and like looking over at Camilla and Harrow and Gideon. And she says, an inadequate Lyctor, said Cytherea, as though giving Gideon and Camilla a hot tip on stain removal. Still makes the perfect power source.
So funny.
Stain removal.
It's like, could anyone else ever write such a like amazing like tactical fight scene riddled with so many good lines that are funny?
It's so irreverent, and Tamsin Muir never takes herself too seriously, but obviously, you know, we still cry when we read these chapters. So,
and
you know.
Sobbing. So I begin this chapter and I start crying because I know what's going to happen at the end of it, and I just cannot take it.
I can't get through we'll get to it. The line it's a Bible verse actually, but the line that Gideon says before she says, see you on the flip side, sugar lips.
So good.
I can't get through that one without crying.
Right. So just how Ianthe, here's where we get a little interlude before phase 3 of this fight, but just as Ianthe is almost totally out of the fray, Camilla does this epic knife throw and hits Cytherea with it. So kind of returning the favor that Ianthe saved Camilla. Now Camilla's kind of getting involved.
Right.
And Cytherea is very surprised by that, but she turns and she's like, oh no, heroics. Surprised that someone did that, but also kind of bored by the fact that these people who are insignificant to her are even trying to fight her at this point.
She must feel like, you know, it would be like the equivalent of us getting attacked by like a couple of mice. It's annoying, but like, you know, you wouldn't be afraid for your life. You'd just be like, get off of me.
Right. I mean, I feel like at one point after Camilla goes down, she steps on her collarbone. She just kind of walks and steps on her. It's at moments like that. I have a lot of empathy for Cytherea. And it's moments like that where I'm like, you're just an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're all assholes. I mean, and I think at one point Tamsin Muir said this, and I don't remember where I read this, but basically the life that these lictors are leading, it basically selects for the shittiest people. So it's the shittiest of them that end up surviving. The best lictors all die.
Yep. It's kind of like capitalism and how to move up in a company. If you get to the place where you're running a $1 billion company, you probably did a bunch of bad shit to get there.
Yeah, truly.
It's the same thing. So we move into this next phase of the fight, which when you think about it, we've got Gideon with a crushed knee.
Oh, right.
Camilla's got a fucked up shoulder. Ianthe is not conscious maybe at this point, and Harrow's still unconscious. So this is like a motley crew of young people up against this 10,000-year-old Lyctor, and Gideon still gets up to try and fight her. And so we enter into phase 3 of this fight, which is Gideon versus Cytherea.
Can I just say I think it's so funny and cute that you separated this into phases? Like in the notes, it has the phases.
I was like, how are we possibly going to talk about this fight in like a cohesive way?
Oh my God.
And my memory of this chapter is just pure chaos.
Right.
And I realize it's actually really structured. It's a very structured chapter. And again, like I mentioned, I think it should win an award because it's so good.
The award for best gay fight.
Best gay fight.
Best fight. What am I saying?
Me. I need you to get inside me.
That whole bit is, I mean, extremely sexual.
Yes.
We can't deny it. So we move into phase 3, which Mel has defined as Gideon versus Cytherea. And this is the bit where I do feel like we get a little bit more. I mean, we wouldn't have known without Harrow, but without having read Harrow. But there's a lot of little tidbits in here. Like when Cytherea says to Gideon, "You're very brave, a bit like another Gideon that I used to know, but you're prettier in the eyes." And we know that she's referring to Gideon the First. But I mean, I don't even remember this line from the first time I read Gideon before I read Harrow. I just didn't even register. But I feel like if you were a little bit more careful in your read than I was, you probably could have put that together with the note that Gideon had found with her name in it.
Mm-hmm.
And Gideon does respond to this by saying, "If you say any more cryptic shit at me, you're going to see how well you can regenerate when you're in 18 pieces."
I love Gideon's confidence here. It's like, you are no match for this person, but you're still dishing him out.
There's also another sort of cryptic thing that she says. Cytherea says, "You don't even know what you are to me. You're not going to die here, Gideon," which I feel like involves a little bit of a change in tune. It seemed very much like she was fine with Gideon dying.
Right.
Up until this moment.
It's very strange.
Mm-hmm. And Cytherea says, "And if you ask me to let you live, you might not have to die at all. I've spared you before." My question is, I know that this probably refers to, I mean, I think specifically the Jean-Marie when she could have killed Gideon.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it's referring to.
Yeah.
But I
think
also
so.
like it almost seems like it's more than that. I wonder if, because I think Cytherea was involved in the Mercy Moore and Augustine Gideon wake situation when Gideon was born. And I do wonder if Cytherea had an opportunity to kill baby Gideon or like, you know,
right.
knew what was going on and decided not to intervene. I do wonder if it's also kind of referring to that, because I think she was involved, right?
I think she was involved, although we'll have to confirm, because it also might have just been Mercy Moore and Augustine working together.
Mm-hmm.
But Cytherea is obviously in bed with Blood of Eden.
Right.
So it's unclear at what point Cytherea was involved in that plan.
I think she's also in bed with Mercy Moore. Literally.
Oh,
I mean, we'll talk about that later.
But it's Gideon the First who actually spares Wake, who is pregnant with Gideon. So in that instance, right. I don't know. But there might have been other moments. Yeah, I'm sure we'll learn more.
Yes.
I hope.
Oh, I think we will.
But anyway, so, you know, Cytherea says all this to Gideon. Gideon's not having it. Gideon puts up as good of a fight as she can. She's really no match for Cytherea at this point. Right.
She's got a crushed knee, and what else is wrong with her? Her arm is broken.
Yeah, it's just bad news. There's also this, for the second time in this reading, Cytherea stops a sword swing with her bare hand.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
She also stops an overhand blow from Gideon. It just bounces off her collarbone.
Right.
That's unnatural.
And again, I think it is. I think one of the points of this fight is to really demonstrate how powerful lictors are. And it's doing that. It's doing that for us.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we have another like just in the nick of time moment where, you know, Gideon's about to lose this fight. Harrow just steps in and says, "Step off, bitch."
Just in the nick of time.
Just in the nick of time. And doesn't do much, but does create another bone shelter. And this is what I call the bone shelter interlude, because this leads us up to the end of this chapter, and we get these really tender, beautiful multi-page scene between Harrow and Gideon, basically just like professing their love and admiration for each other.
I think you did say love, though.
As I mentioned, you can love someone without it being sexual.
Okay, well. It's really cool that this is a very intense, very quick-moving fight, and yet Tamsin Muir found a way to like kind of have this pause where these two characters are able to just be all mushy and cute for a second, but also still have the tension. It's really good.
It's really good.
As a reader, you're like, give them enough time to say what they need to say.
Yep.
And she does.
She does. And it's cute because the power dynamic totally shifts in this moment. It starts out with Gideon kind of acknowledging that Harrow's figured out how to make perpetual bone, half destroyed a giant dead spider from hell, and now she's raised a solid wall 6 inches thick and was holding it up with sheer nerve. I mean, Harrow is powerful, not even as a Lyctor yet. But Harrow is an incredible necromancer. And at this point, Harrow is very vulnerable and weak. And Gideon is telling her, hey, you need to siphon me because you cannot hold on to this. Right. And Harrow's like, fuck no, I'm not doing that. Did you see what happened to Silas? I'm not doing that to you ever again. And then they have this exchange, you know, back and forth for a few pages where each of them is trying to sacrifice themselves for the other, you know, and they're having that like really gay back and forth. I'll die for you. No, I'll die for you.
So much. Can you read me some quotes?
I'll read you some quotes.
It's just too good.
I'll start funny and then we'll go mushy. So
okay.
This is actually not to Harrow, but to Hecht. And Gideon said, like, Hecht is also jumping in that I'll die for you kind of moment. Ugh. And Gideon's like, I'm not getting haunted by Palamedes Sextus's crappy ass revenant, all telling me doctor facts for the rest of my life just because I let you get disintegrated. Which, again, hilarious. Just Gideon is, I think, at her best in like wittiness in this chapter. It's so good.
Yes.
And then my note here is just a heart. Gideon is looking down at Harrow and she's like feeling really viscerally like, oh my God, we're going to die. Because everyone's like being weird. And Harrow says, Nav, have you really forgiven me? Of course I have, you bozo. I don't deserve it. Maybe not, but that doesn't stop me forgiving you, Harrow. Yes? You don't know I don't give a damn about the locked tomb, right? You know I only care about you, she said in a broken-hearted rush. I mean, if this isn't fan-fiction-y, I don't know what is.
This is every sweet young queer's dream.
And then Gideon's like, I can't do this without you. I'm not your real cavalier. And Harrow basically, again, the backdrop is that there's like a wham happening on the bone where either the construct or Kytherea is like trying to break it. And Harrow laughs. And it was the first time she had ever heard Harrow really laugh, which is just, I can't. My heart melts. And she says, Gideon the Ninth, first flower of my house. You are the greatest cavalier we have ever produced. You are our triumph, the best of all of us. It has been my privilege to be your necromancer. And then I think we all just have a breakdown when like, it's over. I can't read through my tears. I'm like, because you know what's coming. You know, when everyone starts confessing their, like, deep admiration and love for each other, you know what's coming.
Yeah, although I will say that the first time I read this, and it's funny because I think I knew what happened in the end, but I didn't quite believe it, or I was like, no, it isn't real. And even here I was like, no, it can't be. They're not going to kill off the main character.
The title character.
Yeah. But spoiler alert, everyone, Gideon dies.
Gideon dies in the most tragic and heroic way that one could maybe ever die. It's also cruel in a lot of ways, but it's not meant to be, but it is.
Yeah, and I think that she acknowledges that to Harrow, but Gideon realizes that the only way that they're going to get out of this is if Harrow is able to become a lictor. So she basically commits suicide, falls on these iron stakes that are below them on the terrace, and kills herself so that Harrow is able to incorporate her soul and become a lictor and therefore defeat Cytherea. So the last bit of this chapter just says that Gideon fell forward right onto the iron stakes. And then it all goes black and we get to chapter 37.
Act 5.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those moments, if this was a play, the curtain would just drop and everyone would be like, wait, what?
Right.
What did I just see? What happened?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was emotionally wrecked by this point.
Yeah, but I will say that it's chapter 37 that kills me.
Of course.
Yes. I mean, I was crying at the end of chapter 36, but I wasn't actually sobbing until the end of 37.
All right, so 37 is a grand...
I'm tearing up just thinking about it.
It's a grand total of like 5 pages of pure sadness.
Can I just really quick remind everyone that in order to become a lictor, you do have to actually ingest some of your Cavalier. So presumably Harrow, through hysterics, is eating some of Gideon's blood. I'm just saying.
I didn't even register that. When I saw that in the notes, I was like, wait, really? And we don't get to watch that?
It wouldn't be very good for the pace of this fight, but presumably Harrow has to do exactly what Ianthe did, which includes, a drop of blood will do, says Ianthe in the last section.
Right.
But yeah, Harrow had to go lick some blood off of Gideon and do this 8-fold word thing.
Ugh, it's so intense. Wow, she's totally devastated. And so after this presumably happens, we enter phase 4 of the fight, which is really Harrow the First versus Cytherea.
Right. And it's interesting because at the beginning of this chapter, we've switched to Harrow's perspective, but Gideon is there. And I remember reading this the first time and being like, wait, what? And truly being thrown by the fact that Harrow is having this conversation with Gideon about how Gideon can't leave. And they're talking about how Gideon's sword is too heavy and Gideon's helping her hold the sword from behind. But it turns out that it's just kind of a hallucination. And actually, Gideon is dead, and Harrow has spliced in Gideon's brain chemistry to become a lictor. But it is sweet how Gideon is still very much in character Gideon in this hallucination. I think it's part hallucination and part Gideon is in her mind.
I have to believe it's Gideon actually in her mind. I cannot. I feel like the line where Gideon says, "Oh, I'm just a hallucination," I reject. I will not. Yeah. I hate it, and I feel that it's actually Gideon, or just. I mean, I guess Harrow knows Gideon better than anyone else, so it's just an extremely accurate hallucination.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Gideon is not physically holding Harrow's arms from behind and helping her with the sword, but I do feel like it's Gideon's soul that's within her. Because we also know, and we learn in Harrow, that the soul is not fully incorporated until, some time has to pass. So I have to believe that Gideon actually does sort of witness this fight and is kind of at the forefront.
Right.
She's still kind of there and present. Right. She hasn't been forced down that well yet.
And she says, your arms are like fucking noodles. And Harrow's like, I'm a necromancer. Of course they are.
They're still arguing.
I think the moment that I had the realization, oh shit, we're reading this from Harrow's perspective, is that Harrow looked back at Gideon, and Gideon's eyes, as they always did, startled her. Their deep chromatic amber, the startling hot gold of freshly brewed tea. And that was really sweet to see Gideon through Harrow's eyes and recognize that Harrow really does see Gideon. Because there was always this back and forth where when Harrow would get really angry, say, I don't even think of you, right? And we've talked about that a few times, but here clearly that's not true. And here we see kind of an acknowledgement of how much Harrow actually really does see Gideon and think of Gideon.
It's heartbreaking. And I feel like at this point it barely even matters, but they kill Cytherea. They do realize they can sense. It's funny because actually we learn in Harrow that lictors can sense everything going on inside of everyone except other lictors. But in this scene, it kind of implies that Harrow is sort of able to sense at least some parts of Cytherea. Mm-hmm. Anyway,
right.
They sense this mass that Palamedes pushed along, and they say, I think they do acknowledge that Palamedes has a role in defeating Cytherea, and they stab her through the heart. And I feel like Cytherea kind of goes almost willingly at that point.
Yeah, she's full of relief. She's been like dying over and over again for 10,000 years, and finally is actually dying and is not going to experience pain anymore. So she accepts it. And I think she came here knowing she was going to die. And this was her moment. I do want to go back when they're talking about Palamedes' role in Cytherea's demise. Mm-hmm. Harrow says, Sextus was a marvel. And Gideon says, too bad you didn't marry him. You're both into old dead chicks.
Brutal slam.
Boom.
Brutal slam on Harrow out of nowhere.
And then you have the line that wrecks you.
Yeah, so at the very end of this chapter, they've killed Cytherea. Harrow, doesn't really give that a second thought and goes and I think is kneeling by Gideon's body. And Gideon says this line that wrecks me every time. It's actually a direct quote from the Bible, from the book of Ruth. It's Ruth 1:17 if you want to look it up. And the verse reads, the land that shall receive thee dying, in the same will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so and so to me, and add more also, if aught but death part me and thee. And it's interesting because I remember, this is from the story of Ruth, which is a story about how this woman Naomi had a son who married, I think, a foreigner named Ruth. And the son dies, and Ruth is so loyal to Naomi that she refuses to leave her side and follows Naomi to wherever she ends up and kind of sticks with her mother-in-law. I'm sorry if this is inaccurate. I think this is correct. It's interesting to me because, first of all, it's a beautiful quote. Secondly, I looked up the translation. This is from a very old translation of the Bible that was an effort to kind of preserve the Catholic tradition in the face of the Protestant Reformation, which is interesting. Because as we know, this is like a very Catholic-inspired book. But also, I thought it was really interesting that this quote is here because when I was young and this, closeted queer person, and I knew the Bible really well, and I always was like I read this story as a little bit queer. And it's like a mother-in-law with the daughter-in-law. And I don't think it's actually a queer story, but it's two women, and this one woman professes her loyalty and like refuses to leave this other woman. And I remember as a young person being like really into the story of Ruth.
Well, clearly you aren't alone.
Yeah. It's like kind of a gay story. And it's a beautiful quote. It is followed up with "See you on the flip side, sugar lips,"
which it should, as it should be, because it's Gideon.
Yeah. We couldn't leave with something quite so, deep. But yeah, that's how it ends, and I cannot get through that line without just losing it. I also can't read the line, "I cannot conceive of a universe without you in it," without dying inside. I don't even know if I can talk about it.
No, and then Gideon's like, yeah, you can. It's just less hot.
Yeah.
And Harrow's like, shut up. No, it's I feel like other than just the fact that it's always heartbreaking to see one of the best characters ever written be killed off, I feel like when it's flipped to Harrow's perspective, it almost feels that much harder, because there's so much speculation up to this point on like how much of this is mutual. And again, there's obviously still questions about the nature of their relationship, but what is not questionable is that they do have deep love for each other. And you always see that from Gideon's perspective. And you always also perceive Harrow as being like very closed off and having a lot of mommy and daddy issues and doesn't trust anyone and shows her love in these really weird ways. And then here we actually get to see what Harrow thinks of Gideon, and it's so hard. I feel like it's really good to end on Harrow's perspective. Was I mad about it? Yes, but it makes for a really heart-wrenching read in a way that I don't think it would even have the same impact if we ended with Gideon's perspective. I think we had to end with Harrow.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that ending it on Harrow's perspective, with Harrow kind of just like, they never mention Camilla again. It's just Harrow kind of kneeling beside the body of her dead cavalier under a blue and foreign sky, which I think is a really beautiful image. And then we do a time jump to the epilogue. I always wonder, and I think I've said this before, but there's a wealth of fan fiction out there about what happens next in between a blue and foreign sky and the epilogue, because we've got Camilla, Coronabeth, and Judith hanging out in Canaan House.
And Gideon's body.
And then we have Ianthe and Harrow. And somehow, in this space of time, a couple things happen. Blood of Eden somehow extracts Camilla, Judith, Coronabeth, and Gideon's body from the first house and takes them away. Harrow passes out because we know that she wakes up on this spaceship, kind of.
But we don't know when Harrow passes out.
Right, but I can only imagine that she must have passed out. There's no way that she would ever have left Gideon's body, right? So, like, it's interesting to me that we've got Harrow passed out and someone coming and taking Gideon, and then Harrow...
Well, and Ianthe is theoretically still unconscious.
Yeah, I mean, anything could have happened, but it is, it's ripe for fan fiction because...
We don't know. We
don't know how much time passes. We don't know how much time passes between, Blood of Eden picking up the surviving necromancers and cavaliers and Gideon's body, and they must have been picked up first, and then Harrow and Ianthe were picked up after that. It's just interesting to think about. Who knows?
It is interesting because we can presume that Harrow would never leave Gideon's body, which I mostly agree with. And we don't actually know. And because of what Harrow does to her brain, she doesn't even know. And so anything could have happened. And Harrow could be well aware of blood. Like, we have no idea. It's not likely, but we don't ever get confirmation of how much Ianthe and Harrow actually know of, like, what went down between the moment Cytherea dies and when they wake up on that ship.
Right. We just know that. So we can go through the epilogue now. Basically, Harrow wakes up. As far as we know, she has no memory of anything between the end of their fight with Cytherea and now. She wakes up on a spaceship. She can see space outside the window. She's in this very sort of hospital-y laboratory, like sterile room. I found it really funny. She's in a turquoise hospital frock. Like, I love the thought that even though this is 10,000 years in the future or more, like, they still are wearing, like, specifically turquoise. Why are all hospital frocks turquoise?
I don't know. There's got to be a reason for it.
It's weird. But she's wearing this, she's, banged up in this bed. And there's a man sitting in a chair in the corner looking at his, basically his iPad.
He's probably playing Candy Crush.
Yeah, no doubt. And we get a description of him. He's a very basic looking dude, except for his eyes, which, as far as I can tell, are completely black, like different kind of shades of black, but all black except for a white ring right inside the sclera.
I love the description. I didn't pay much attention to the description of his eyes originally. I love how Tamsin Muir describes the like pupil as this rainbowy black. And I was like, what does that mean? And then when you think about it,
Like oil slick.
Right. It's like that's how she describes the inner part of his eye. And then there's like a white ring. And I had to Google what is a sclera, which is actually for all of us normal people, it's the white outer layer of the eyeball. And John's are all black. So I didn't realize how creepy his eyes were. I totally missed that the full eyeball was black until honestly this read through. But it's very creepy. It is creepy. And it also, I mean, never forget they're not actually his eyes. Right.
So weirdly, yeah, Harrow is seeing the eyes of the actual eyes of the woman that she is in love with. And she, without being told, immediately knows that this is God, the Necrolord Prime. And she falls to her knees and begs him to bring Gideon back because he resurrected the whole planet. So I think she's assuming that he can do the same for Gideon. And he says he can't, which I think is bullshit, actually.
I also think it's bullshit. That's why I wrote, like, is this actually true?
Yeah, it's bullshit.
Not true.
I think that there is a price to resurrection, but I think that of anyone could take the soul. I don't know. I just feel like this guy is full of shit. I felt like it from the very beginning. This guy is full of shit.
I didn't catch it. I feel like my instincts are off. I was like, oh.
I just didn't like this guy.
Weird. I was like, oh, weird. But I didn't not trust him. But I should always trust the man in charge. Or I should not ever trust. Wait a minute. I should.
Wow, you are deep.
I am very cult ready.
Deep in the system.
I should never trust the man in charge. And that's kind of the lesson here.
Yeah. He's sketchy AF.
Yeah, Harrow is begging him to bring Gideon back. And he's like, no, I can't. And she's like, how dare you ask me to live like this? He's like, well, you have to because the Empire is dying. And then he also claims that, nobody was meant to lose their lives unwillingly at Canaan House. But Cytherea, he blames Cytherea. It's like, I don't know. This guy is just, he's like a sociopath.
He's delusional.
But he does have, and here's where he's the best kind of cult leader. He's very manipulative and he is pretending, I think, empathy towards Cytherea and like blaming himself. And Harrow's like, you're awfully forgiving. And he's explaining, I wish she would have just come and talked to me and we could have worked it out, like that would have been effective. And he says, like, I only wanted those who had discovered the cost and were willing to pay it in the full knowledge of what it would entail. Which, again, I also don't really think that's true.
Yeah, because even when the original, and he says that Harrow is not the first person to become a lictor under duress. And so he knows that even in conditions where he was there was no lictor trying to like sabotage everything. Still, some of his original lictors became lictors under duress, which I think refers to, at the very least, it's pretty clear, I think, that Alfred and Christabel, who are Mercy Morn and Augustine's cavaliers, made a suicide pact to kind of force their necromancers to become lictors. And, I mean, I think that that's definitely becoming a lictor under duress. And so he's at least referring to this happening. And so he knows that even under perfect conditions, I mean, as perfect as they could be, still people are going to end up becoming lictors under duress. And he's still, I mean, this guy he's a wiener.
He's evil.
I don't like him.
And so, we wrap up getting a little window into what we can expect for the next book. And, this is where we learn, like Amy mentioned, that the bodies of Judith, Camilla, Coronabeth, and Gideon were not found by God's crew. And, you know, Harrow's like, someone's going to burn for this. She's obviously so upset. And we also learn here from God himself that he can't go back to the first house himself. And I think Harrow asks why he can't go back. Do we get an answer? We don't really get an answer. Yeah, why can't you go back? It's very cryptic. Harrow asks, why can't you go back? And the Emperor said, I saved the world once, but not for me. It's a non-answer.
He's just like, he's avoiding, oh my gosh. He definitely thinks he's a benevolent overlord. But he's not. And Augustine, I think, says in Harrow, John is never as sentimental as he acts or seems.
Right.
And we learn that he's basically been fighting this like long revenge war against the rest of humanity for like, I think Augustine says purely symbolic reasons. I mean, like, he, you know.
This guy's a bad guy, y'all. Stay away. But
as far as we know at the beginning of meeting him, he seems fine.
He seems fine.
Right?
You don't really know. You just know he has creepy eyes. And the epilogue ends in this epic, dramatic way where Harrow agrees to be his lictor. He, like, pretends to give her a choice. She's like, yeah, sure, I'll be your lictor. And he says, then rise, Harrow, hark the first. And that's where we end. And I am mad at this point. I've gone through my stages of grief. I'm devastated that Gideon is dead. I'm mad that I'm reading it from Harrow's perspective in the epilogue and that Gideon, it's confirmed here to just not exist. And I am furious, not wanting to read the second book, text Amy. I'm so upset. And Amy's like, you got to just read it.
Yeah. Buckle down. I remember I read this book. I read Gideon the Ninth right before Harrow the Ninth came out, actually. So I finished it, and I knew that, like, in a couple of months, it had been delayed, but Harrow the Ninth was coming out in a couple of months. And I had heard that it was second person, and I knew it was from Harrow's perspective. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to read that. I, like, was fully, like, so pissed. And I was like, I don't want to read second person. It's not going to be as good. How dare she kill? I was like being such a sassy little biatch about it. I was mad. And I remember there was a lot of conversation about people were getting all self-righteous about the kill your gays trope where it's always the gay character that dies. And people were like accusing Tamsin Muir of playing into that trope, which almost all of the characters in these books are gay. So, I mean,
and there's going to be
you're
death.
going to kill your gays. You just have to wipe them all out. Total party kill, baby. But also, you know, as we do learn, death is not quite death for these people.
No. Thank Goddess. Not thank God, but thank Goddess.
Truly fuck John.
Yeah, fuck John. And that's how we'll end this episode. No, let's talk. So we have finished Gideon the Ninth. Woo! What a ride. It's actually been very fun to read these books, paying much closer attention to the details. I got a lot out of this read through. I want to say something, you know, it's June, it's Pride Month, and it feels so good to be able to read books that are this gay. And not only like, oh, I'm going to throw in one gay character, but the whole essence of them is gay. One flesh, one end. You know, like it's the whole vibe is poly and gay and filled with all these interesting and complicated relationships. The queerness is vibrant in these books, and it feels so good to read a book where it's also not the point, you know? And there are all of these stories and movies and books that come out that are all about people coming out and what that's like, and those are really important stories. And it's not the whole queer experience, you know. Coming out is a big deal for a lot of people, but it's not everything. And what I love about these books is it's just a thing. Like, we've got bi characters, we've got asexual characters, we've got queer in all sorts of ways, and it's just accepted as part of this universe, and it's awesome.
Yeah. I remember being a little bit, I wish that there was a little bit more transness or genderqueerness in the books, but I do feel like we might get a little bit more of that. I feel like it's never been super explicit. I think there's like kind of this attempt at having a non-binary character in that one priest.
Oh yeah, that's right.
The they them priest.
Yeah, you're right.
But I think that's more because like she literally can't figure out if it's like just an androgynous person.
Totally.
They're just an androgynous person.
We get our token androgynous, like our token non-binary. Is that even? Well, hey, maybe that's an invention. Now we've got a token non-binary person.
Boom, baby, check it off the list. No, but I do think just from reading Nona, even if it's not like explicit, I feel like there's a lot of gender queerness just around like the sharing of bodies and souls. We can talk about that later, but I will say that that's the only place where I was like, oh man, I could have had more trans characters, but it's so queer. It feels really good. I mean, I just imagine my 14-year-old self reading this book. Ugh.
Yeah, I wish this book existed.
14-year-olds can read this now. That blows my mind. It's really cool. Thank you, Tamsin Muir, for making this a thing that we can read, and also the youth can read. The
youths can read, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that this book is so much about imperialism and capitalism, but never says it. And that's also just really well done. And we'll talk about it, I think, even more in Harrow. If Gideon is about a lot of interpersonal relationships between necromancers and cavaliers, Harrow is about systems and imperialism and the system of capitalism, right? And then that kind of plays out in Gideon on an interpersonal level, but we see a much wider universe and the problematic kind of existence of these 9 houses and what it means. You know, there's a really good line I was just rereading, and I won't go too much into it, but the short story behind Harrow, where I think Judith says something like, Blood of Eden calls these planets steel planets, and we call them
holding planets or something?
Yeah, it's like basically the perspective of the conqueror versus the perspective of someone who's having their planet taken from them. And it's just really good. And so you get a lot more of that in Harrow. There's, of course, a lot of interpersonal shit that goes on in Harrow, but you do see the broader universe, and it's really well done how these patterns played out in Gideon without us even knowing about the broader universe. So more on that.
Yeah, something tells me I would agree with a lot of Tamsin Muir's worldviews.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's Gideon the Ninth. We'll cover the sort of the appendices. Appendices.
I don't know.
Oh, God.
I don't know. How do you see it, fam?
Write us.
Speaking of listeners, we had a really great email from Solitaire. Apologies if we mispronounce. Who cued us into Tamsin Muir's own house quiz, which we did take.
Thank you.
Amy, what did you get?
I got 5th house, followed very closely by 4th and 6th.
That's so interesting to me. I got 4th house by a long shot, followed by the 6th, which I don't know what that means. I'm actually like kind of confused by that.
No, I think that totally makes sense because you like dive headfirst. You're like a doer. And it totally makes sense. And then you're also a nerd.
That's true. Okay. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
You've got a lot of initiative.
What do you think is so 5th about you?
I don't think I'm very 5th.
Well, you're funny.
I'm like very... Oh, you're because like Magnus? I don't know if I want to be funny like Magnus.
Well, too bad.
But I'm not very diplomatic. I'm like, I don't know if I'm a particularly
but
like
you're very
tactful
smart
person.
And you read a lot. That could be part of it.
I feel like the 6th makes sense.
Yeah, but the 5th is also very smart. I mean, think of Abigail.
That's true. I mean, honestly, I would love to be compared to Abigail anytime. Although I'm, I don't actually think I'm anything like her at all.
I think you got a little Abigail in you.
Oh, Mel, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me.
But in addition to the house quiz, Solitaire had some great, I think we might have covered some of this in our last episode, but just some commentary on some thoughts on the third house. And again, just some, I thought this was really interesting. I think I had said at one point that it was weird that Harrow said to look out for the big one. And I think something I had mentioned was it's bizarre for Harrow to be that wrong, because Coronabeth clearly is not like the bigger threat than Ianthe in these moments. But Solitaire says that, we don't know that Harrow meant Coronabeth when she said the big one. Harrow very much sees things her own way. Gideon assumes she means Corona, but I could see Harrow perceiving Ianthe as the big one because Harrow tends to observe power. And I fucking love that. I think that's highly likely. So thanks for bringing that up.
Also, they said something about, the theory that Coronabeth sees herself as Ianthe's cavalier and Nibirius is just a cover. And I say 100%.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, and I do also think, I have wondered, like, why didn't they just make them, Necromancer and Cavalier? And then I remembered, and Solitaire pointed this out and reminded me that it's taboo to have siblings be Necromancer and Cavalier. And they also say that they're guessing that that's because of Augustine and Alfred, which, as we know, was very fraught. So it does make sense that, given what happened between Augustine and Alfred, that it would have, started, part of the tradition became that you did not become Necro and Cav with your sibling. So thanks for writing us. We love it. Keep them coming, because I feel like everyone sees things that other folks don't see. And it's really, again, that's why we love these books, because there's so much interpretation and so much to keep discovering as we keep rereading. So thanks for reading along with us, y'all. Oh, Mel, also one more thing that they said. Remember when you were like, how did she fit her sword into the trunk? Yeah. And Solitaire's like, oh, it's probably like a steamer trunk footlocker type of thing, which totally makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. But I didn't even know what that was. I had to Google it.
Did you think it was like a soft?
Yeah, of course. I thought
suitcase?
A rolly suitcase, that's what I travel with.
Yeah, fair. I don't know what I thought, but I don't think I envisioned like a trunk, but that totally makes sense.
Yeah, that makes way more sense.
So thanks for clearing that up.
A very important point.
It was the big question. Yes. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, continue to send us questions, comments, concerns, complaints. No, don't send us complaints. We're trying our best. All right. So should we go ahead and wrap it up for the day? I think that we said this before, but look forward, please, to our upcoming episodes, which will include the discussion about the appendixes. The bits at the end of the book that are not actually included in the book of Gideon the Ninth, and also the short story, The Study of Dr. Sex, which is from Camilla's perspective, which is really cool. So we'll have a couple of little episodes on those, hopefully coming out on the next couple Tuesdays, if we can swing it. And then we'll start on Harrow. And our goal is to just finish Harrow by the time that Nona comes out. So that's the goal.
That is the goal. We'll see.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much, as always, for listening. Please rate and review us. And please send us questions on our website, lockedtombpod.com, or on Twitter, which is lockedtombpod, @lockedtombpod. I'm Amy.
I'm Mel.
And we'll see you next time. We'll see you next
we'll
time.
See you necromancer time.
We'll see you necromancer time here at the Locked Tomb podcast.
Peace.
Bye now.